Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Indie Zone. My name is Kathy. On April 24th, 2025, the court entered an order on state's motion in limine regarding number 1, text messages, and number 2, 911 call. And by way of background, although the court does summarize what both sides' arguments and positions were, I recommend that you read the briefings. That would be the state's motions, the defense's responses in opposition, and the state's replies, replying to the defense's response. This will provide you with a lot of background and provide you also in detail what the state was arguing, why this evidence should be admitted at trial, and why the defense was arguing the opposite, why it should not be. In this order, which is quite long, and I'll leave you to review it after you review the briefings first, the court goes into the law as to why the majority of what the state is proposing should be admitted into evidence so that the triers of the fact, the future jury who will ultimately be deciding Mr. Kohberger's guilt or innocence, will be able to see and hear this evidence, provided, however, the court says here that the proper foundation is laid at trial. Let's go over what this introduction says before we get into some of the details within this order, because it is, for the first time, providing key facts of the events of November 13th, 2022, the day of the catastrophic events at 1122 King Road, that we, the public, never knew before. The introduction tells us DM and BF are the two surviving roommates of 1122 King Road. At the time that the crimes were believed to have occurred, DM saw a masked intruder in the house and began calling and texting the other roommates, including BF. Approximately 8 hours after DM saw the intruder, BF called 911 from her phone. Before the court is the state's motion to allow the text messages by DM and BF, testimony about their communications, their conversations with each other, about what DM saw in the 911 call. The state argues these communications are either not hearsay or qualify under one or more exception to the hearsay rule. It also asks that a transcript of the 911 call be provided to the jury to view while listening to the audio. Defendant challenges several of the communications and objects to the use of the transcript. So this is why it's important to read the briefings, because you will then be able to know in detail what both sides' positions are as they come before the court after oral argument that happened on April 9th, 2025, the last time either side had an opportunity to convince Judge Hippler to rule in their favor. Now we see the order, the ruling. The court finds that some of the hearsay statements on the 911 call do not qualify under the exception cited by the state and thus therefore must be redacted. However, the balance of the 911 call, as well as the texts and conversations noted herein, are likely admissible provided that the requisite foundation is laid at trial. The transcript will be allowed as a demonstrative aid, again assuming proper foundation is established. So here we see basically a victory for the state, with the exception of a few things that the court is denying that will be allowed to be admitted into evidence for the jury to hear and say, so long as The state lays the proper foundation as to why this evidence should be admitted, with the defense being provided an opportunity to object to the foundation at trial. Then judge will make a ruling. Note here at the bottom of page 1, the footnote, the court's rulings on the specific text messages, phone activity, 911 statements are appended here to in table format as exhibits A and B respectively. I think that this is really helpful. If you go to the appendix, what the court did, line by line, he's listed the record, what item is before the court, such as at 2:10:29 a.m. DM to the Uber driver inquiring if he was driving, and then the ruling. So you can go down line by line and see what the court's ruling is for each individualized item. I'll leave you to do that at your leisure, but I think it's a very helpful tool that's been provided here. Next page. I want to now go over some of the pieces of information, the details that the public was not privy to before this order. Beginning, facts section. It says here, after spending the evening out, roommates DM, BF, Kaylee, and Madison returned to their home at 1122 King Road in the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022. At approximately 2 a.m., they met up, meaning DM, BF, Kaylee, and Madison, in Kaylee's bedroom, which is located, as we know from prior court documents, was on the 3rd floor of the house. They met up there in Kaylee's bedroom and talked for a while before going to bed. The 5th roommate, Xana, who was out with her boyfriend, Ethan, was not home yet at approximately 2 a.m. Now the court describes what apparently happened at that time. The roommates debated going out to a food truck for a late snack, prompting DM to send a text at 2:10 a.m. to an Uber driver she knew to see if he was driving. Ultimately, however, the girls decided to just go to bed. Those two texts between DM and the Uber driver are located, the first two items, in the appendix at 2:10:29 and 2:13 a.m. Doesn't say which food truck. It's a possible guess that they're talking about the grub truck, where we know from prior court rulings that Kaylee and Madison were a short time before this meeting up in Kaylee's bedroom at 2 a.m. All new information in this paragraph. Next, at approximately 4, DM heard strange noises and crying coming from the bathroom. We're not sure which bathroom. There's 3 bathrooms in the house. 1st floor, 2nd floor, where DM's and Xana's bedrooms are located, and then on the 3rd floor, where Kaylee and Madison's bedrooms were located. She opened the door, meaning DM, at one point, and saw a man dressed in black with a ski mask on. This information has been provided to us in prior court filings about what happened, what she saw, what she heard. Only BF, who resided on the ground floor, answered her efforts to try to contact certain people in the house. It says here that they spoke for 24 seconds, during which DM told BF she thought she heard something. So we're now learning what the context of that telephone call was between the 2 surviving roommates. They spoke again, going into page 3, a minute later for 41 seconds, when DM told BF she saw a man in a ski mask leaving the house. First time we're learning what the contents of that call was. Then it goes into the exchange between 4:22 and 4:26 a.m. that you can read in detail. What I wanted to point out here that we're learning, I believe for the first time, is the time when DM left her room on the 2nd floor to go downstairs. It says here, that once DM arrived at BF's bedroom, they locked the door and both made additional unanswered calls to the other roommates. At 4:32, DM again texted Kaylee, so it would appear that she left her bedroom sometime before 4:32 a.m. Going back to the prior paragraph, DM exited her bedroom and began running toward BF's bedroom. On her way down, she noticed Xana lying on the floor of her bedroom with her head towards the wall and her feet towards the door. DM thought Xana was drunk, and this comes from grand jury testimony. First time we're learning of this, that DM saw Xana on the floor where she was positioned, that this apparently occurred sometime before 4:32 a.m. So let's bear in mind that the house was probably dark. We don't know what was illuminating the area from the great room where DM ran after exiting her bedroom towards the steps. She would have had to turn her head, look down the hall, and then saw Xana. Again, at that time, it was very likely that it was dark. She went up a second time later in the daylight, as we're going to learn here soon. Going on to the next page, we learn here that later in the morning, exchanges were made at 5 and 6:30 a.m. that I will leave you to read in the appendix. But I wanted to point out that DM continued to access Instagram and Snapchat until 11:29 a.m. when she texted Kaylee, "Are you up?" There was no response, which DM thought was strange because Kaylee and Madison were early wakers. We did not know this information before. Next paragraph, a lot of new information here. It states at approximately 11:50 a.m., DM called her friend EA and asked her to come over and check the house because she was scared. EA and her boyfriend HJ came over. They met DM and BF at the bottom floor of the house. Together, DM, BF, and HJ started to walk up the stairs to the second floor. When they reached the second floor, HJ went to the kitchen to grab a kitchen knife. When he came back, out DM, quote, saw Xana again for a split second, and I just started bawling because I thought she had just I don't even know. I thought maybe she was still just drunk and all asleep on the floor. BF also saw Xana lying on the floor. This is all new information that the public is learning for the first time. Next paragraph, HJ told DM and BF to get out. EA, who had started up the stairs, also turned around after HJ instructed her not to come up any further. They both went outside. Shortly afterwards, HJ exited the house and told them to call 911. He was pale white and mentioned something about someone being unconscious. All new information. We can make the educated guess that after he told everyone to go back down, he walked down the hall and saw something that made him be pale white, as is described here. At 11:56, BF called 911 from her cell, spoke to Caroline Calvin. First time we're learning the name of the 911 dispatcher. Call lasted 4 minutes, 11 seconds. During the call, the phone was passed around to different individuals. That's accounted for in the appendix, so I'll leave you to read that as to what happened. The next page gives a synopsis, addresses the 911 call in detail. I'll leave you to read that. DM then informed at the bottom of page 5, Xana was 20 years old at that point. HJ took the phone. Dispatch asked him if she was breathing, to which HJ answered no. Then law enforcement arrived at that point, and after confirming with DM that the responding officer had, next page, arrived on scene, dispatch ended the call. Later, at approximately 1:04 p.m. that day, DM received a vandal alert regarding the homicide. Next paragraph, the court goes into the analysis of what hearsay is, what it's not. Next several pages continue. Page 7 at the bottom, section A, text messages and verbal conversations between DM and BF are likely admissible, again with the laying of the foundation. Next page, that the court goes into DM texts the Uber driver to inquire if he is driving, goes on to discuss first present sense impression, exception to the hearsay rule. Next page 9, DM's text to the victims. Next page, it goes into the verbal communications between BF and DM. I'll leave you to read all of this until we get to the last page of the order, where the court then reestablishes what he had said on page 1. 5. Order. Based on the foregoing, the state's motion in limine regarding text messages and testimony is granted in part and reserved in part. The state's motion in limine regarding the 911 call is granted in part, denied in part, reserved in part. The denied part is the section where the court has found hearsay inadmissible. It will be redacted. The jury will never hear that portion of the 911 call. And again, if you go to the index, you can read line by line the individualized rulings by Judge Stephen J. Hippler. If you have any comments or any questions, please leave them here. This will now conclude this episode of the Indie Zone. As always, I thank you for joining us here today.